I have a very bittersweet experience with this gospel passage that we just heard, because when I was first called to be a priest, when I was in college in the year about 2007, dating a girl for a few years and always planning to get married and that whole thing, and then I felt the calling to leave everything to follow Jesus. And I was not too keen on actually listening to that call, but I just thought, well, if God is calling me, which I really felt very strong in prayer, I was being asked to leave everything to go after him. It's like, well, I might as well just do it. And so I broke up with her, and I was so strong in my resolution that I lasted about 26 hours. And then I went back, and I was like, there's no way I can actually do this. It's going to be too hard to live by myself. And the next day, I go to Mass right after getting back with her, and this was the gospel of that Sunday. And it was a reminder to me, and this is what Jesus is talking about to his disciples. If you're going to come after me, you have to understand what that's going to entail. And Jesus flips the parable around. You see that in the beginning. He's like, what person trying to build a building wouldn't make sure that he had everything he needed in order to construct that, right? All the materials, all the money. Or what king going into battle wouldn't make sure that he had all the men and weapons prepared to win? And so you think he's going to follow it up with saying, and you too must have everything that I asked of you so you can be my disciple. And yet he flips it in the end. Says it's not about how much you possess. It's about how poor you're willing to become to follow after me. Right? Because that's the greatest temptation that we have, is the gifts that we receive from God in this life, that we come to love them more than him. And the devil, his greatest trick on every one of us, the reason I never could conceive of following Jesus as a priest was I thought I knew much better what I would make me happy in my life. Right? And who doesn't face that temptation? That if I follow Jesus Christ in my life, if I really make being a disciple of Christ my number one priority in college, I'm going to miss out on so much good. My life would be so much happier if I didn't have to follow all these commandments. It's the first temptation that we ever faced in the Garden of Eden. God knows well that when you eat from the tree of forbidden fruit, you will become gods yourselves, knowing right from wrong. Right? So that seed of distrust is within every one of our hearts, that if I can decide what I do, what I hold on to, how I make my decisions, I'll be happier than if I follow God. And yet Christ, he turns the whole thing on its head when he comes to save us. He says, if you really want to follow me, if you want to get to heaven, you have to be willing to lose anything that gets in the way of our relationship. This reminded me of a story I heard a long time ago. I'm going to read it to you. It's a short story. It only takes about 30 minutes, so no, I'm joking. It's about 10 minutes. But it's a really good story that exemplifies this. It says, once upon a time, there was a man who had a long, hard journey ahead of him. He was trudging along the way, over the boulders and through the brushes, when he saw a little shiny gnome with big teeth and black toupees sitting by the side of the road. He was drumming on a log with two white bones and humming oddly to himself. The little gnome said, "John, why work so hard? Why walk so fast? Who knows if you'll ever get there anyway on this great journey of yours? Come over here. I have something to show you." So John walked off the road. He was sick of walking anyhow, because people kept throwing sticks and stones at him. He was tired, and he knew his destination was still a long way off. The little gnome said, "I have a shiny red jewel I would like to sell to you. It's cheap. Here it is." And from beneath his cloak, he pulled the biggest ruby that the man had ever seen. It must have weighed 100 pounds, and it shone as bright as the sun. The gnome said, "Do you like it? It is an enchanted stone. What will you offer me for it?" The man said, "I don't have much money. I'm going on a great journey, but I will give you everything that I have." And the gnome looked displeased. So John added, "I could pay some more monthly." So the gnome accepted. Fair enough. Buy now, pay later. Sounds good to me. I'm all for the installment plan. So the man gave the gnome all his money and promised to pay the rest later. And the gnome walked back into the bush by the road, clacking his teeth and giggling and twitching. The more the man thought about his ruby and the great deal he got, the happier he became. He started back on the road with a light heart, but soon discovered that he couldn't make much progress because 100 pounds was a lot to carry. He said to himself, "Why continue anyway? I have what I want. Why don't I just stand here holding my ruby, and when people walk by, they can see how well I've already done for myself?" So he stopped. A little while later, one of his friends came along and saw him standing there. His friend said, "John, why don't you come along with me? I've just opened a new business, and I could really use some help. Come along quick, it will be opening soon." The man thought that sounded good, but his friend was in a hurry. Besides, couldn't he see the ruby that he was holding? How could he speed along beside him? Where would he put his jewel? So he said, "Thanks, but I have to take care of my jewel. Maybe I'll see you later." His friend looked at him like he was crazy, but he was trying to get somewhere quick. So he just shrugged a bit and said, "Okay, John, see you later." And he sped on down the road. A little while later, another friend came by and he said, "John, nice to see you. I'm going back to school. There are lots of wonderful things to learn, lots of great things to do. The world is so full of unsolved problems. I could use some company. Would you like to come along?" And the man thought that sounded pretty good, but his friend looked like he was in a hurry. Besides, it was tiring, standing there on the road, holding the jewel, and he needed all the energy he had for that. So he said to his friend, "Thanks, but I have to take care of my jewel. Isn't it beautiful? Maybe I'll see you later." His friend looked at him like he was crazy, but he was trying to get somewhere quick. So he just shrugged and said, "Well, I hope everything goes well with you. I'll see you later." Many friends came and went, and the years went by. The jewel got heavier and heavier, but the man got more and more attached to it. The only thing was, nobody seemed to notice how beautiful that jewel was. People would rush by and talk about their plans, and nobody had a ruby as big, and nobody seemed likely to get a ruby as big. So you'd think that someone might have noticed and said something, at least like, "Nice ruby, John. Sure wish I had one like that." But it never happened. No one ever saw it. Then one day, someone new came down the road. He was bent over, and he was thin, and his hair was gray, although he did not look that old. He was carrying a big, dirty rock carefully in his arms, and he was not making much progress. The strange figure approached and glanced up at John. Then he grinned and said, "Why are you standing there stupidly with a big, ugly rock in your tired old hands? You look pretty daft. I bet you wish you had a big ruby like the one I am carrying." And John thought, "This poor man must be deluded. He is carrying a rock. It is me that has the ruby." So he said, "Excuse me, sir, but you are sadly mistaken. I am the one with the jewel. I met a little gnome by the side of the road, and he sold it to me. I am still paying for it, although not so very much. You were the one carrying a rock." The tired stranger, who looked pretty annoyed, said, "I don't know what kind of games you're playing, mister. You have a rock. I have a jewel. The little gnome you described sold it to me, and he said it was the only one. I've been carrying it for 20 years, and I will never let it go." And John said, "But I have been carrying mine for 20 years too. It can't just be a rock." Rock or jewel, on and on they argued. Suddenly, out stepped the little gnome, as if he had never left. Only this time, he wasn't so little. He was bigger and redder and menacing, and his laugh sounded like the rattling of chains. "Quit arguing, you two. I've never seen such quite so pathetic people in my life. You're carrying rocks, both of you. And if you would ever have had the sense to put them down for a second or two, you would have seen that they were rocks all along. Oh well, at least you were diligent, and I played a mean trick. I feel bad. So, I'm going to give you both what you really deserve. Do you want what you really deserve? And John and the thin stranger nodded eagerly. Finally, they thought, you haven't seen anything yet. Throw down your rocks. So John and the thin stranger obeyed. Each rock thrown on the ground split down the middle. When it hit the ground, out flowed a river of ravenous white worms, which rushed towards the men and devoured them whole, while they were thrashed about and screamed. Soon nothing was left, except a leg bone from each. The little gnome picked them up and walked off the road. He sat down by a hollow log and started to drum upon a rock. He drummed and he waited, and he hummed an odd little tune. A picture of food feeds the whole hungry clan. The image of good makes the whole healthy man. Why walk the mile? Why do the work? Just smile to smile. Success, after all, is a quirk. Life isn't real. That's the message I give. It's easy that way. Plus, who really wants to live? The end. Not a fairy tale. Not a very happy ending, of course. But what does that say? What is the message in it? How many people have we seen in our life or been tempted ourselves to hold on to something that in the moment we think it's the greatest thing in the world? And as time passes away and we grow older, we realize how decrepit we've become with that. It's actually a great image of drugs, right? Hotel California. Once you go in, you can never get out again. But it's something that allures you into it, and you get so sucked into it, like a toxic relationship, you don't know how to let it go. And then little by little, your life passes it by until it ends up consuming you in the end. That's the great temptation, and that's the way that the devil works. He offers us a peace that we think will make us happy, and we give everything for that. We don't realize all that we're losing outside. So when Christ says we must be poor and be willing to be dispossessed completely to follow him, what he's actually offering us is true freedom. And I still have a recurring dream where times I'll wake up and then I'll be sleeping at night and I'll dream that I never left, that I just stayed in the world, married a girl, stayed in my hometown. And when I wake up at this time, I'm like in a cold sweat because I realize all the life, the journey, and the love that I would have missed out upon had I not followed Christ's call to leave everything to follow him. The lie of the evil one is that God's plans for us will never make us happy. And for us to follow Jesus Christ, to truly enter into his poverty, it's an act of faith. But we have to be willing to let go of the things that keep us from walking on that journey to follow Jesus Christ. And we all have our own possessions. As we go into the rest of this Mass, the sacrifice on Calvary, on this altar, I want you to think about for your own life, what is it something that you're holding on to, you're afraid to let go of? Because you've just become so accustomed to keeping it in your arms. Even though that maybe the people around you, you yourself know that what you're holding on to is just a broken rock with nothing to give. And Jesus never says, just let go. He always says, grab onto me. Come after me. What do I need to let go of in my life so that I am free to grab on to Jesus Christ and receive him right here in the Holy Eucharist, so that my life and my eternity is laid before him on the very altar where he comes to meet us in his holy sacrifice.